Good evening, everyone. My name is Mike Merwicki, and I am the Southern Vermont organizer for Vermont Interfaith Action. And welcome to this candidates forum for the Windham County Democratic Senate primary. I'd like to start with a disclaimer that we did offer a forum to the Republican Senate candidates, but they have yet to respond to us. So we are trying to give equal time to different people. And if they do respond, we will be glad at a future time to put a forum together. I also want to thank BCTV, who will be airing this recording, and as well as there will be a link available for the candidates to air this. VIA has sponsored several candidate forums around the state to ensure that the issues and values that Vermont Interfaith Action is working towards in regards to systemic change that we give candidates an opportunity to talk about how their values and ideas might align with what VAA is advocating for. To start with, I'm going to ask Fred Brunig, who's a Brattleboro resident and a board member of VIA, to give the credential that we use to start our meetings, to talk about VIA a little bit. Thank you, Fred.
Thanks, Mike. Vermont Interfaith Action. We transform people, we transform communities. Our mission is to create solutions to systemic issues that prevent our most vulnerable citizens from enjoying the quality of life that God intends for us all. Our faith-based coalition of more than 70 member and affiliated congregations works for systemic change around issues of social justice. We are currently working actively in the areas of immigration, corrections reform, racial justice, and affordable housing and homelessness. Our goal is to create the hope, the power, the knowledge, and the political will needed to make compassion and social justice a reality for all Vermonters.
Thank you, Fred. Reverend Lisa Sparrow, the chair of the religious committee at the NAACP of Windham County, is going to be the moderator tonight. And I was going to ask her to share a little reflection to start us and set a tone for this evening.
Thanks. So I've decided to use a land acknowledgement as the way to begin, because our candidates are really going to be serving this land, this people, this place that we all love. And I've been fortunate to have had teaching from Judy Dow, who's one of the Abenaki leaders in Vermont. The beauty of these things is it's not only a greeting, but it also helps settle us in. And so I would just invite you to settle in. This will take about a minute as this way of opening our meeting tonight. Welcome, dust and cool of day. Welcome, waning moon and chant of crickets, frogs, and field sparrows. Welcome, rush of stream and long rivers. Welcome, butterflies to the ragweed, loosestrife, and chicory. Heat hovers in the Wantasticate Valley. Tomatoes are green and corn is climbing, and the first of the wild blueberries that wait on Black Mountain for us to come and carry them away are there. Perhaps the birds will find them first. We can feel the stories of the land we stand on, stories of this land when it was far underwater and continents were one, stories of the great push to make the mountains rise, stories of the glaciers pushing through to leave Earth bare and ready for the grasses to grow. We imagine the joy the Sokoke people will have known in the Great Valley, the fishing and hunting, the celebrations and sadnesses. And we acknowledge the loss of land and life, of language and culture, losses of hope and possibility, losses brought about by illness and violence, by ignorance, invasion, and eugenics. We mourn the wisdom lost and show respect for the wisdom still present among and with us. We are grateful for the care the Sokoke have given this land for generations. And tonight we name our hope that we might work together in ways which heal and reconcile, that we find leaders who celebrate and live out traditions we have destroyed, that Ndakana might be honored once again. Aho.
Thank you, Lisa. Lisa's going to be the moderator for tonight, and we're joined by Fred Brunig and also Guy Wood. Fred represents the Guilford Community Church. Guy represents the Brattleboro area Jewish community, and I'm a member of the Putney Quaker meeting. So we represent a wide span of towns and faith communities, and we bring that interest to bear here. So Lisa, I'm going to pass it off to you to moderate. And one last thing, I will be the timekeeper, and there'll be 2 notices that you get. One will be a yellow card for when you have 30 seconds left. And then there's the time's up card. And now, Lisa, thank you.
So Mike, just as a note, when you held up the time's up when it wasn't high enough, we just saw times, so a little higher. So I wonder if we could ask the people here gathered if they'd be willing to grant an extra 15 minutes so we could go through the full hour that we were hoping for. Could we get a sense of thumbs up, or maybe we could just say we will go for an hour and we understand if you have to leave. But I think that would only be fair to the candidates who've given over this evening to this event. Is that all right with you too, Mike? Yeah, all right. So just so you know the format, each candidate will have 3 minutes to start with an opening statement. And we're doing that alphabetically just because we need it in order. But then as we go through the questions, we'll rotate through. So different candidates will start with answer to the questions as we go through. And Mike has already said that we have a timekeeper and that Fred and Guy will be asking the questions. And then we will stop about 10 minutes before it's over, and each candidate will have the opportunity to make a closing statement. So without further ado, I would invite Fred Brunig to, I would invite Wichi, whose last name begins with A, to make his 3-minute opening statement. Thank you.
Sure. Hello. Thanks. Thanks for having this forum. I really appreciate being able to just be with everyone together and help share sort of where we're all at as candidates. My name is Wichi, like Quichi with a W, Artu, pronounce he, him, his. I am a queer Boricua, Boricua meaning Puerto Rican in the Arawakan indigenous language. I grew up with 2 moms and an indigenous dad, born in Puerto Rico, and then later grew up in Boston. And I've had a lot of opportunities in my life through government programs such as METCO, the last desegregation program in the country, which is in Boston. And throughout my life since I was 14, I've done a lot of public health in performing arts, in workforce development, and food systems, and most recently in hospitals. In fact, I was part of the most recent New England HIMSS conference, which is the people who set the procedures and codes for the world on your medical procedures. And I was on a panel along with people like Michael Fine, who's the chief health strategist in Rhode Island and one of the first builders of an EMR, electronic medical record, in the 90s. And in Vermont, I've done a lot of community organization work, including founding the Council on Racial Equity at Brattleboro Memorial Hospital, being part of the Racial Equity Task Force with the Director of Office of Racial Equity to advise the governor on how to promote equity in our state. And I helped push for the recommendation that gave undocumented folks stipends during COVID. I've also get contracted a lot with legislative advisory councils such as the Racial Disparities Advisory Panel, where I was the main consultant to create the now Criminal Justice Data Warehouse under the Office of Racial Equity. And my most proudest moment of that legislation was actually that the people who dictate how if and why data is collected and analyzed is actually the people whose data is being collected. So that means victims of crimes, people with criminal records. So that way there is accountability through the people whose data is being represented to hold the government accountable to data that is being held by our government. I also, right now, I'm a health equity and data systems consultant, right? So I get contracted by a lot of different folks, including the Department of Health of Vermont and the CDC. And one of my most recent contracts was the vaccine clinics here in Southern Vermont, where I organized with over 40 different community partners. Thank you, Mike. In Windham County, and then more so in Rutland and Bennington to provide simple, people first vaccine clinics for people of color, and was part of the greater state efforts on that. That would be it for me. Thank you so much.
That's perfect. Thank you so much. So we'll turn now to Wendy. Wendy, would you give us 3 minutes of an introduction?
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I really liked how you did the opening. This is unlike other political situations. So it's very nice to have that setting. So I'm Wendy Harrison. I'm a Vermonter by choice. I moved to Brattleboro in 2015 with my husband, Peter Elwell. I'm the mother of 2 young adults. They're living nearby for now, which is great. They're facing some of the same, but also some very different challenges than I faced at their age. I have 30 plus years of local government experience as staff in Philadelphia, Florida, and Vermont, and 8 years as an elected council member in a town of 60,000 residents in Florida. In Vermont, I worked first for Wyndham and Windsor Housing Trust, as I had experience in affordable housing in Florida. And 2 things really impressed me about WWHT: how they preserve historic resources at the same time as providing housing. And they also have a wonderful shared equity model for homeownership that I had heard about in college, but actually never seen implemented. I immediately, when I moved to Vermont, volunteered to serve on the board of Southeast Vermont Transit, which is the mover. And I was appointed by the governor to the state transportation board, and I still serve on that state transportation board. My first local government job in Vermont was as the municipal manager for Rockingham and Bellows Falls. I enjoyed the challenges of those communities, the relationships, worked a lot on the police department, the budget, on economic development. After that, I served as the interim CEO for NECA, the local circus school. You're probably familiar with it. And while I was there, I recalled my experiences in Florida when my UU congregation was between ministers. I was the president of the congregation at that time, and I was impressed by the intentionality of the UU interim minister program, which some of you may be familiar with. And rather than just keeping the daily processes going, an interim minister helps the congregation identify and address organizational issues in the congregation so that the next manager has a better likelihood of success. And what I've done is successfully adapt this model to towns because I find it very relevant. So I've done that. I did that for Vernon initially. I served 9 months as the interim town administrator for the town of Vernon and helped them find a new manager. And this past April, I completed 6 months as an interim city manager for the city of Winooski. And that's what I would be doing if I wasn't running for this office. So briefly, in 30 seconds, what I want to do, I want to protect voting rights and inclusive processes. That's fundamental. It's put your own mask on first. We need democracy to succeed. Address climate change, improve sustainable options to the automobile, which is a critical component to combating climate change. Better bus service, more train service, better bike paths and sidewalks. I want to promote equitable and sustainable economic development. I'm currently the chair of SevEds, and I believe SevEds with BDC is doing that, and my time is up. And thank you much.
Thank you, Wendy. Thanks very much. So Nader.
Great, thank you. Thank you to the VIA for putting this together, and thank you to all the community members who showed up as well. My name is Nader Hashim. I currently live in Dummerston with my 12-year-old daughter and my partner. And for my entire adult life, I've been dedicated to working in public service right here in Wyndham County. I graduated from Clark University in 2011 with a degree in political science, and immediately after graduating, I began serving as a Vermont State Trooper in the Brattleboro and then the Westminster Barracks. And during that time, I served on the Fair and Impartial Policing Committee and spent about 7.5 years traveling to all of the towns in our county and seeing the real challenges that Vermonters face. And around 2018, I felt compelled to do more for my community, specifically as it related to police reform and creating protections for migrant community members. So I ran for office as a state representative and was able to serve on the Judiciary Committee. And while I served on this committee, I was able to follow through on the majority of my goals related to police reform and also protecting our migrant community members. During my time in the State House, I also supported legislation to raise the minimum wage, create paid family leave, protect access to reproductive health care and abortion, create common sense gun laws, protect victims of domestic abuse, and also to address the opioid crisis. So I'm now running for state senate because I see that we're losing two very effective leaders. And I know that I bring the proven experience and track record that's needed to create positive legislative change for our community. Also, as a former House member, I can tell you that some of the biggest challenges come from disagreements between the House and the Senate. And I believe that with my previous experiences and legislative understanding, I'll be able to help bridge that gap and effectively collaborate between the different chambers. So far during my campaign, I've heard from Windham County voters all across this county that the most pressing issue right now is housing. And that's followed closely by workforce development and then climate change. And those are my top 3 priorities. And my plan is to work to make sure that people's basic needs are met and that we're doing our job not to just to reduce our carbon footprint, but to also to prepare climate resiliency. Lastly, and most importantly, in my opinion, I strongly believe that we must protect and preserve our democracy. We must make sure that we continue to allow access to the ballot, respect peaceful transitions of power, and protect people's civil liberties and rights. My hope is to bring my experiences as a trooper and state representative back to the State House so that I can efficiently create good legislation that will support growth, vibrancy, and safety here in Windham County. Thank you.
Thank you, Nader. So we'll move to the first question, which Fred Brunig will ask, and Wendy, you're up for the first answer. And then Nader will be second and Richie final.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. I hope this will be an easy one for everybody. Proposal 2 will be on the ballot in November, which will amend the Vermont Constitution to abolish slavery with no exceptions. Should Vermonters pass this proposal or not, and why?
Yes, of course. And that was the end of my statement that was lost. Yes, and particularly in the details of it are that indentured servitude, if money was owed, was a condition that a person could be caught under, and that should certainly be abolished. So yes, I support proposal number 2.
Okay, Nader.
Thank you. Yes, this is an easy yes to this question. Yes, I support Prop 2, and I believe that we should amend the Constitution to incorporate this. My belief is that constitutions are living documents that should be amended and modified as society progresses and cultures change. And we should also keep in mind that these are documents written over 200 years ago, at a time when people were considered property. So yes, I support Prop 2.
Thank you. Richie.
As a descendant of slaves, I 100% support Prop 2. And not just for the principle of it, but also because it is often ignored that slavery is actually still allowed by our Constitution. And this is not just in the Vermont Constitution, this is in the United States Constitution. The 13th Amendment allows for slavery when you are criminalized. That's why we have California fires being fought by people in jail for $1 an hour. So by being able to take this step in Vermont, we once again can be that progressive state in the United States pushing for banning of all slavery.
Thank you very much. Guy has the next question, and it will go to Nader.
Did you unmute?
What will you do to guarantee that healthcare is available and affordable for low and middle income Vermonters?
So when it comes to healthcare, my thoughts are, my philosophy is that healthcare should not be a for-profit industry in any capacity. That's my philosophy as it relates to healthcare. Specifically in Vermont, we're faced with the challenge of primarily a workforce development challenge when it comes to having nurses in our hospitals, and as well as doctors. But my understanding is that nurses are that workforce sector that's in really dire need right now. And I think that supporting workforce development and how we provide healthcare professionals the training and resources so that they can practice here in Vermont, I think that's very important. I also think that we need to look at how we are charging for health insurance, because the cost for having health insurance through the state of Vermont is exorbitantly expensive. And so I would definitely work to try to reduce that cost and also develop our workforce. And I'll also say that this is an area in which I'll admit my background isn't in the healthcare industry, it's in law enforcement and the judicial system. And so this is a place where I would lean on experts. I would lean on people with lived experience as well to find out what's needed and how we can make things affordable, accessible, and equitable.
Thank you.
Thank you. Richie?
Yeah, so health equity, healthcare, that's my thing. I'm glad this question got brought up. To sort of start, I want to note that at that National HIMSS conference, I actually sat on the panel with Mary Griskewitz, who is the Director of Federal Government Affairs for Cigna. And in that panel got asked, what do we need to do? And that answer is universal healthcare. We need single payer. I am a data systems expert in healthcare, and the one thing that I can tell you is that it's a hot mess about who's your insurance, what procedure did you get, what plan did you get, did we even get denied? If so, what was the denial reasons? Not to mention we're being forced in a rural state to go all digital, forcing our hospitals to go for cheaper systems that don't even allow us to be able to look at denials, that don't allow us to even understand how our own charge masters work. And I can tell you right now, I've been in seats with other people who are in healthcare policy, and no one exactly understands the system 100%. We need to consolidate and simplify the process. I think on a policy basis, that's definitely what sort of the thing that I want to do exactly. I think on a more philosophical stage, I am a systems thinker. When I think about healthcare, I don't think just about you needing to go to the doctor. I'm thinking about the communications technology you need. Thanks, Mike. The communication technology you need to register, the type of transportation that you need to actually get there, whether you're on a dirt road or in an urban center. The actually going to a doctor where you don't need to explain the type of service that you need because they understand your experience without you having to explain it, being able to pay for it. And then when you go home, having the agency to stay healthy. That means having a house that you can live in, food that you can have, right? The exercise that you need to be able to stay healthy. So that's my approach to making healthcare accessible and affordable. And most importantly, moving our system from a reactive healthcare and sending you to the emergency room to a proactive, making sure that you're able to stay healthy so we can keep you out of that emergency room.
Thank you, Richie. Wendy?
Yes, healthcare is a tremendous challenge for many reasons. One is it's similar to what Richie was saying about your experience, they've shown that your zip code is more of an indication of your health than really anything else, because your environment and your access to healthy food, to transportation is very fundamental to your health. And it's only when those systems fail that you need the formal doctor hospital situation. So first and foremost, and I think Vermont is good at this, we can always be better, is providing a healthy setting. We have more resources, for example, the farm to school program, where children have good, healthy local food. That's huge. So that's the first level. Then the second level is the current system that we have, the exchange. We're on the exchange now, my husband and I, and it is very expensive, and it shouldn't be this expensive. So I think the state can look at ways to make it less expensive, which is obviously funding, which we can find funding for that. The third level is to take another look at universal health coverage and single payer. And I need to be better informed on this, but what I've found so far is it seems like Vermont may have given up a little bit too early. And I think we need to take a look at that. And there might be other states. Colorado's doing some really neat stuff in healthcare. So it could be that we could partner with another state and still have economies of scale, even though we're small. So it's important and critical. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. So we have another question from Fred, and it will go to Wichi to begin.
Thanks, Lisa. One of VIA's organizing committees focuses on affordable housing and homelessness. And currently there are over 2,000 Vermonters who are being sheltered by the state in motels using federal dollars. What are your ideas on how to house these adults and children when the federal money runs out next spring? Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Fred. So I hosted, in the past few weeks, I hosted listening sessions with the community, and one of those was actually on housing, where we had people who do state housing policy work, and from those who are homeless or on the brink or have family members or friends that experience homelessness. And I think there are two things to acknowledge. On the first is noting that there are three different ways that we need to approach this. The first being that there is an emergency right now. Right now, there is a crisis. We need to make sure that people stay off the streets, especially as leases expire and people are kicked out, especially as we see, as we have winter coming up, right? As we see bills coming up and people are not able to pay for those bills. So we need to deal with the emergency crisis. Second, there's a lot of flooding from ARPA money on building infrastructure. I think there's a lot that's going to be coming in the next 3 to 5 years, and that's going to make sure that we need to focus on making sure Act 250 is simpler for people. Right now, Act 250 is incentivized by getting people to have to go through litigation and not litigation, but having to go to the courts through all of that process. We need to make it an incentive to be able to help people navigate through that. And lastly, we need to be able to help folks actually be able to advocate for themselves. A lot of what is happening right now is we have people going to needing housing, but it's not just housing they need, right? They also need food, and they need transportation, and they need healthcare. And we need to make sure we have navigators navigating them through all these systems. And second, we need to increase tax revenue here. We got flooded in the market with people wanting to do Airbnbs. We need to look at taxing Airbnbs for people who are using it, who are not living in those houses that are Airbnbs, to be able to increase that revenue, to be able to increase our revenue, our tax revenue in the state, to be able to do more about housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Wichi. Wendy.
Thank you. And we've been dealing with housing for a while, and it's just gotten worse. My experience working for WWHT and also working on affordable housing in Florida has shown me just how complicated the housing issues are. There's a number of different factors that are in play here. One is a smaller family size. In Brattleboro, for example, we have a fair amount of families who are one-person families. So the units don't go as far. There's a lack of new builds. We haven't kept up with building new units, and that's something that goes back a decade at least. Zoning codes have been a problem, especially the exclusionary zoning codes. Now, Brattleboro and other towns in Windham County have done a good job of updating their codes to now allow tiny houses, small houses, and to prohibit restrictions on those, which is great. Lack of maintenance. We have some buildings that actually, if they had been maintained, would be suitable as housing now. And then seasonal rentals and part-time residents, especially the COVID refugees, have exacerbated those problems. And it's really important that when we do build housing, we do infill development, and which is much preferable to suburban type development. And we also rehab the houses that are there. And the state did a lot of work to prepare for additional housing next year, including support using both the private and the public sectors, which is something rather new. And I support that, with the caveat that the investment in the private sector needs to be carefully crafted so that it does show a specific public benefit. Specifically in Brattleboro, there was a study last December showed a need for 500 units. The Winston Prouty site may actually provide between 100 and 500 units. Now, that's not going to happen for a few years. We can also look at rental property inspections. That's important to keep the property up to code. And communication between landlords and tenants is critical. And we need this is something that we need to do together, and everyone impacted needs to be involved. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Now Nader.
Thank you. So, I'll start by saying that my personal belief is that there should be zero homeless people in this country. We're the most powerful and wealthiest country, and yet we have an economic system that continually perpetuates income inequality and poverty. And I believe that it's the role of government, at a minimum, to provide the bare necessities for people to live. That means food, shelter, and water, at a minimum. Now, as it relates to policies, I think that we have the opportunity to collaborate with towns and the treasurer's office to work on getting grants and bonds to use the remainder of the ARPA funds to build housing infrastructure in village centers. And I think that we have to focus on village centers as the most efficient way, or the most efficient location to build out housing, for a few reasons. Because one, that will lower people's carbon footprint. People will need to drive less. People will be within walking distance of their necessities. And the next step, as has already been mentioned, which I agree with, is that we need to revisit Act 250 in order to allow developers greater opportunity or better opportunity to build in Vermont. A few months back, I attended the Southern Vermont Economic Summit, and I learned that it takes 16 months to 2 years for a developer to get the permits to start building in Vermont. And that's not the construction, that's just getting the permits, and tens of thousands of dollars. That timeline does not work with the housing crisis that we have. And I also think that legislators, if we want to support not just our local population, but also support international refugees and climate refugees, we have to have the focus on housing. I do have to say that I don't believe that we should raise taxes. Right now our budget is in a healthy surplus. Our projections, or the joint fiscal offices, oh, time is up, okay.
Okay, thank you. All right, we have a question from Guy, and this one will go to Wendy.
Okay. This week has been yet another reminder of the climate emergency that the world is facing, both in Europe and the United States. What will you do to accelerate an end to fossil fuel use towards renewable green energy?
Right. No, it's really scary what's happening. The state actually has a very good plan in place to address climate change. And this past year, there was a bill to change heating systems. and heating fuel. And it was vetoed by the governor. So it's really important that we get folks in there who can override a veto. He vetoed it at the end of the session, but that was a really important component. Another component, just over half of emissions are from automobiles and trucks. And so transitioning to electric vehicles is really important. This, again, the state has been doing well on that, but we can do more. We can urge people to transition to electric vehicles, especially by providing charging facilities. And I just read today that Tesla is going to voluntarily make their chargers accessible by others. It was likely that the government would have to force them to do that, but that's really good because they've staged them very well. Because a lot of folks don't want to get an electric vehicle because the charging stations aren't all there. So the state just a few months ago actually put out bids for multifamily locations to have charging stations, which is great. So, but everybody can't afford an electric car. So then you got to help people be able to drive less. So transit, improving transit, having additional train service is huge, which would also help economic development in addition to the climate situation. Our sources overall are going in the right direction with the hydro plants and wind, but there's a lot of work to do.
Thank you, Wendy. Nader.
Thank you. So I see climate change as one of the biggest existential threats that we face as a society and a species. I think that here in Vermont, the role that we can play in reducing our carbon emissions comes from looking at our greatest contributor of carbon emissions, which is motor vehicles. And I think that first, when it comes to EVs, we have to be providing more EV incentives, because if, let's say, the average cost of a gas operated vehicle is around $20,000, whereas an EV is $35,000 to $40,000, most families or individuals are going to go for that cheaper gas operated vehicle. And I think that the EV incentives that we should be putting out should be more robust. And I think there should be different tiered levels. And I also think that we should allow them to be applicable to used EV purchases as well. And the next part of that is I also believe we need to build out more public transportation infrastructure while also keeping in mind geographic equity. And what I mean by geographic equity is, you know, if there's a train in Brattleboro, how does somebody from Wardsboro access that train if that person from Wardsboro is not able-bodied, or if they don't have a friend who can drive them? Those are the things that we need to think about, and it's very challenging. The next part also deals with climate resiliency. You know, even with the most optimistic scenarios, we're still going to see climate catastrophes. We're seeing significant heat right now. I'm sweating profusely. And I think that in building out climate resiliency, we need to look at housing and protecting or enhancing local food systems, and also building resiliency along our waterways. So those are my thoughts on climate change and climate resiliency.
Thank you, Nader. Richie.
Yeah, thank you so much. I feel like a lot has been said on subsidizing transportation and insulation and weatherization, and I'm totally in agreement with that. I want to take us a little bit and tell a little bit of my dad's story in Puerto Rico. In 2016, Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico, and I did not know anything about my dad for 2 days because the whole entire communication had tumbled down. And what I did found is on the local news, my dad's house was destroyed. I saw that in social media. And it doesn't stop there, right? Thousands and thousands of people died because water was polluted, because medicine was not allowed to be frozen or put in the refrigerator because there was no electricity. People died because there was no access to food because so much food was imported and all the roads were ruined. We don't just need to prepare for trying to prevent climate change. Climate change is here. We need to prepare for what it means that we need to prevent our waters from being polluted. As a farmer, I can tell you right now, these droughts, they're really hurting us. Because when we can't water our crops, we can't prepare our crops, right? We can't grow them to the full potential, which means food is going to be scarce, which means resources are going to be scarce, and we need to be prepared for that. And Vermont, as the one place where it is going to be the least affected by climate change, it's going to be the refuge for people. And that means we need to build the infrastructure, all the way from agriculture to making sure our forests stay forests, to making sure that there's housing in village centers, that we have access to clean water, even in the case of an emergency. That's what we need to do. I'm part of the Athens Weather Emergency Committee, and we are meeting once a month to try to make sure that we are able to deal with all the weather emergencies here in our small 400-person town. And there are a lot of bureaucracies that exist in the state that don't allow us to be able to help our people, including that we're all a bunch of volunteers with other jobs. So I aim to decrease bureaucracy and include climate resilience to be ready to accept and mitigate the impacts of climate change.
Thank you very much, all of you. All right, and now Fred is coming back with another question, and it will go to Melder first.
I'm going to move to a question on the budget. Budgets are value statements, and Vermont always balances its budget. This year we had a record budget bolstered by a lot of federal funds. Prospects for next year's budget already are pretty daunting because of the federal ARPA money has been exhausted, and projections are for revenues may be down because of a slower economy. And with the reality being likely that Governor Scott will be reelected, any tax increases are off the table. That means cuts, or at least level funding, which is also essentially a cut. There may be no way around it, and tough decisions will have to be made. And that's why we're hiring you to make those tough decisions. So I'd like you to name 3 values that you use to make tough decisions, such as where to make budget cuts if the state budget runs to a deficit.
That's a
Not
great
your
question. Sorry, yeah, I think I understand most of it. So in looking at our budget as a document that reflects our values, right now, the state of Vermont, our largest expenditures are in K through 12 education, and followed by that, social assistance programs. I think that, as has been mentioned, we have these projections that look good. Even I believe when I was previously looking at it, as far as 2027, things look good. I know that there's a lot of negativity in the world, but when it comes to the Vermont state budget, it is looking healthy. When it comes to the specific values that I look at the top 3 are how government can provide the bare necessities, and that goes to food, shelter, and water. I look at how we are taking care of our kids, and I look at how we are taking care of the most marginalized and disenfranchised people who live within our state. Those, I think, are the top 3 priorities for me. When it comes to budget cuts, I think this really involves making sure you're maintaining communication with your community to see where budget cuts can be made. I mean, no one ever likes to have budget cuts for their programs. And I think that having to weigh the very challenging and difficult options and thinking to yourself, what is the best outcome and the most equitable outcome for my community? I think that's the way to approach looking at the budget.
Thank you. Richie?
Yeah, thanks for this question. Yeah, so there are two things that I want to make sure are sort of like how I would approach a budget. One is how can we increase revenue, and the second one is how can we be more efficient. I don't like the word budget cut because that means jobs, and I don't want jobs to go away. So the question is, how can we make things more efficient? So we're prioritizing providing the service and not creating obstacles for the service. So the first one on creating more revenue, I've already mentioned it. A lot of people are having Airbnbs, and Airbnbs are not necessarily taxed in the same way. I would look to work with Emily Kornheiser, who introduced an Airbnb bill to be able to increase the taxes on that, to increase the revenue that we are receiving in the state, to be able to take advantage of all of these home buys, as well as potentially increasing the tax for second homeowners who don't live in Vermont. So those would be two new tax revenues I would look to. And as far as increasing efficiency, I've mentioned the healthcare system. I think that's a way that we can save money. I also think that decreasing the amount of bureaucracy for food stamps, especially at in a state where 25% people are on the brink of food insecurity, and we're breaking record every week. I know because I work in a lot of volunteer at a lot of food pantries, and we are breaking record every week for the amount of people needing food. So and to get food stamps, you need to reapply every 3 months and provide information like your oil account bill and everything. We need to decrease those efficiencies. We don't need to be going every 3 months. We don't need like so much information, so much personal information. And another is that there came out a report to be able to consolidate how we provide childcare in our state, moving it from the Agency of Human Services into the Agency of Education, because right now they're kind of in both. So being able to consolidate that and being able to work with people like Building Bright Futures and Let's Grow Kids will be key in making sure that that happens in a way that saves us money and provides more childcare.
Thank you, Richie. Wendy.
Thank you. This is a great question, and budgets are a policy document. I really appreciate that you phrase it that way. What I've done in towns is first look at the top 10 taxpayers, because it's very interesting to see who's paying the taxes. It's often not what folks think. And then also the top 10 employers, just to get a sense of the local economy. And I think the state could do that here. I think they probably already know those. Last year's state budget went up so much with ARPA funding, and fortunately the state looked at increases that were one-time expenses. So a lot of this housing money is just going to be a payment or a grant to an organization, and it's not going to be an ongoing expense, because it's critical when you raise tax or raise a budget that you don't lock yourself into a future expense. That's what happened in the pension system. The state was also very smart in starting to address the pensions this year. That was very important. And then as far as new taxes go, it's important to be very strategic, and generally you want to get an extra bang for your buck, so that you're not taxing just for the sake of taxing, but you're also influencing behavior. I believe Airbnbs are already taxed. That's my understanding. And income tax, at a session or last weekend, the likely next treasurer was told us that because a lot of the folks moving to Vermont have higher incomes than existing Vermonters, the net revenue from income tax will likely be higher even without raising the rate, because we're going to have people who are making a lot of money paying tax here. So we need to make sure that we have the staff to be able to enforce that and track those dollars down. So you don't want to, so that's critical to do. My time is up, but thank you for the question.
Thank you so much. I'm looking at the clock, and I'm trying to decide if we should just move to statements or take one more question. Can I look at Mike and ask him?
I think it's time for closing statements.
Okay, so Nader just started, so we'll have Richie start and then go to Wendy and then to Nader, if that's okay. Thank you very much, all of you. I know it's been, I'm sorry we had to restrict the time.
Yeah, so again, thank you so much for being able to host this space. I think if there's one takeaway that we can all agree on, is that we need to change the status quo. That was not my phone. We need to we need to change the status quo, right? The status quo has not been working for us, right? We need to change it. And there are three ways that I want to approach on the way that we want to change it. First is nothing about us without us is for us, is when we create policy, when we create legislation, we're not just doing it in an ivory tower, but we're actually including people that are going to be personally impacted, to be able to gain on the different types of perspectives from different groups of people, and how it's going to affect them, to be able to inform the best policy possible. The next one is being able to acknowledge that that we stand here on these stepping stones because someone else laid their lives here to be able to have this stone be in its position. As we look to see the Supreme Court take away rights, I am a big believer in making sure that we reinforce rights for our fellow Vermonters to be able to live and thrive in Vermont. And finally, I want to note that our job as legislators is not to create bureaucracy, but to create opportunity. And I will consistently look for ways, and I hope to look to the people to look for ways that in which barriers are being placed by our policy. And I hope that we can work together in decreasing those barriers to opportunity. So with that, I really want to thank everyone for their time. I've seen a lot of joy, a lot of hope, a lot of laughter on our campaign, and just really want to thank everyone that's really stepped up in amazing ways that have really touched my heart. So thank you so much. Vote for Ouija, please.
Thank you, Richie, very much. So Wendy, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. I chose to work in government because government is mandated to be for the people. I know it's not always for the people, but that is what it's supposed to do, and that's why I've chosen this career. And I've always made a practice to reach out to residents, to go where they are, and not expect them to come to government offices. And I just want to talk a little bit about Winooski. One of the reasons I went there, I wanted to work there so that I could learn about what they're doing with new Americans, because there's similar activities going on there. They've had refugee resettlement for a number of years, and I thought there were things that Brattleboro could learn from them, and things they can now learn from Brattleboro, because Brattleboro has a wonderful volunteer effort going, particularly with housing. So I just found it very exciting to work in Winooski and help the new Americans register to vote, because Winooski changed their charter to allow non-citizens who live there to vote in local elections, and it was very exciting. I helped them register. We went to them rather than having them come to us, and worked very hard with the new clerk to make sure that the system was legally defendable, because we knew there were a lot of folks out there who were ready to sue the city, and in fact are suing the city to take that right away. And while I was there, they received an equity audit, which was really interesting to learn about equity audits, rating them very high in diversity and needing some work on equity and inclusion, and they're perfectly happy with those results, and they're working on it. So then just generally, increasing equity has underlined everything I have done and I want to do. It's why I went into government in the first place, and it's why I'm running for the state Senate. I have a track record for collaborative action, not a lot of patience for repetitive studies. There's no time to waste, and I'm ready to help. Thank you for having me and for being here tonight.
Thank you, Wendy, very much. Another.
Great, thank you. I want to thank the VIA again for putting this together, and I also want to thank Wichi and Wendy for running for office. These conversations that we're having, these forums are essential to a healthy democracy, and protecting democracy is for me, one of the most important positions that I have. Now, I want to share one thing that I've learned over the years when it comes to working in the legislature, and it's the fact that no single person has all of the answers. Legislating is a collaborative process, and this includes having the ability to reach across the aisle, work with legislators in different chambers and committees, and perform research on a topic with people who have lived experience and people who may be directly affected by that legislator's decisions. And I'm very comfortable with being able to say to all of you that while I may not have all the answers, I'm always willing to work with you and learn from you, and also make sure that your voice is heard in Montpelier. I'm of the firm belief that here in Windham County, we have to develop and improve infrastructure that meets people's basic needs. When people's basic needs are met, and when people who are historically marginalized or ostracized by society have their voices heard, we can thrive as a community. This means that we need legislators who will continue advocating for raising the minimum wage, providing paid family leave, creating more opportunities for accessing safe and affordable housing, and also supporting immigrant and refugee families who want to call Vermont home. And when it comes to increasing safety, we need legislators who have the courage to stand up to groups like the NRA or anti-choice lobbyists, and to advocate for policies surrounding decriminalization and providing increased funding for mental health services. This type of advocating and legislative work is what I've done in the past, and it is what I hope to continue doing in the future if I'm given the privilege of returning to Montpelier to represent Windham County. So I'm asking all of you for your support and your vote on August 9th in the primary and November 8th in the general. And if you have any questions about how you can support the campaign, please send me an email or visit my website. Thank you.
Thank you, Nader. Well, Mike, would you like to take us out?
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you everyone for participating, especially the candidates. Lisa started us with a wonderful reflection, the land acknowledgement. I'm going to end this evening with a poem by Mary Oliver, The Summer Day. Who made the world? Who made the swan and the black bear? Who made the grasshopper? This grasshopper, I mean, the one who has flung herself out of the grass, the one who is eating sugar out of my hand, who is moving her jaws back and forth instead of up and down, who is gazing around with her enormous and complicated eyes. Now she lifts her pale forearms and thoroughly washes her face. Now she snaps her wings open and floats away. I don't know exactly what a prayer is. I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down into the grass, how to kneel down in the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the fields, which is what I've been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? Doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do then with your one wild and precious life? We have a big election coming up, August, November. I appreciate everyone participating and spread the word that democracy only works when we participate. Thank you again, everyone. And thank you to all the voters out there.